Hello and welcome back to the Monsters of Monster Hunter Double Cross, where today we're getting started on Leviathans with Royal Ludroth. And we are going to try and fight a hyper one, because that way it's by itself. And also will last longer. And we're using Adept Sword and Shield with Blade Dance 3 as our hunter art. Or Sword Dance 3, or whatever they want to call it. I don't really remember. And there we go. Let's get some defender going. All right. Hang on a moment. Don't need those. But I will be wanting me some sword oils. Because those are real things that I need to remember exist. So let's get some of that. Some of that. And we're not really going to need that. So instead, I believe there's another type of oil available. Does Milsey sell it? No, it doesn't look like it. Yeah, there's also the part breaker oil, but I suppose I can live without it. Off we go. Yeah, part breaker oil you can get from the trader. Yeah, I mean, really, this oil right here is the most important. Then we go from, thanks Ludroth, we go from minus 20% to 10% affinity. Much improved. And when this beast rages and we're hitting weak spots, then we will have over 100% affinity. Not that that changes anything relative to having just 100%. Dang it. If I dodged more towards it, I would have actually gotten a dodge there. And that was just timing. It's been a while since I've fought a Royal Ludroth. Kind of wish there was some kind of signifier for when your oil ran out or was active other than just looking at the weapon, because like I can't really see the oil effect that well on this thing. At least not for affinity oil. Because affinity oil is red, and guess what? So's the blade. I just feel like if they added another UI element near the sharpness meter, like they do for glaive extracts, that would be nice. Yes, hello. Shame it had to go so far. Ow. Okay, my affinity oil has run out now. Saw a negative crit happen, and that's what tipped me off. Darn that splash. So, Royal Ludroth is a fairly interesting monster. It was the very first representative of the Leviathan class that people got to actually hunt. So it's got that distinction. And thus, its moves are 100% things that people wouldn't have seen before. So that's kind of cool. And then its design is kind of interesting in that it's kind of a monitor lizard with a spongy mane. And that's kind of cool. And then there's also the fact that it was the first monster people would fight while swimming. First large monster. So it's got all sorts of distinctions that are pretty unique to it. And honestly, because of the distinctions it has, I would argue that in Monster Hunter Tri, where there were 18 monsters, and this was one of the few early tier ones, rather than Kurapeko, which was basically a replacement for Kutku that had a lot more personality and whatnot, and I personally think is way better, but that's not the point of this episode. Rather than Kurapeko, which a lot of people would argue, oh yeah, that's the monster that's meant to get you into fighting actual for reals large monsters, because before Kurapeko there's basically just Great Jaggy. I would argue that Royal Ludroth is actually the monster that is more positioned in Monster Hunter Tri as the monster that teaches you how the game is going to go. Because in the past, that was always Kutku. Because Kutku you fight after you fight the small things like Velocidrome and whatnot, and Kutku was the real just intro into how fighting the rest of the game's monsters is going to go. Seriously, get off the sparkly little guy. But I'd argue Kurapeko does not fill that role in Tri. What Kurapeko does is call in other monsters. And sure, by itself, yes, it can teach you some things, but I think Royal Ludroth fits the bill better. It's the first example of its class. It teaches you about both land combat and water combat. It's got small monsters that follow it around. And just generally, it's a tutorial monster for multiple parts of the game. So I'd argue that for Monster Hunter Tri, Royal Ludroth is the teacher. I was angled wrong there. Seriously, I managed to dodge through that without actually getting the adept dodge. I hate when that happens. Like, I so want the adept dodge, but sometimes you just don't get it. Another thing about Royal Ludroth is, unless you fought Baroth first, which I think you can, it was also the first monster with a severable tail in Tri. Like, it's got breakpoints on multiple parts of its body. You can cut its tail. It teaches you water combat. It teaches you land combat against things larger than Great Jaggy. It uses an element, thus also introducing you to blights, though Kurapeko could also do that with Fire Blight. It's got some full body attacks like that one right there. Just generally, Royal Ludroth is a great teacher monster, and I don't know that it gets the recognition it deserves for having been that. Like, Kurapeko is more of a gimmick monster, whereas Royal Ludroth is just a standard monster's monster. Whereas Peko is more about how it interacts with other monsters. Royal Ludroth is just about how you interact with Royal Ludroth. And I think that's cool. Of course, having gotten my start in the Monster Hunter series with the Try demo disc, my intro to fighting like actual for reals large monsters that weren't Peko was Rathian. That was interesting. I need to remember I actually have this hunter art. Guarding that tail, are you? Dang it. Couldn't quite dodge in time. Okay, still have the affinity oil going. I think once this one runs out, I'm going to use some exhaust oil. Even though this is a hyper monster and therefore can't be exhausted. It can be KO'd, and I would like to try for that, even though actually it holds its head up a bit too high for that to be a likely outcome. So, never mind. I'll use affinity oil as long as this monster lasts or my stock lasts. I'll use affinity oil until one of these things stops being true. Either the monster is alive, or I still have affinity oil. As soon as one stops being true, I will stop using affinity oils. The only one of those things will result in me using a different kind of oil. Also, let's not forget, little Ludroths are basically the Bullfangos of the sea. Just like Bullfangos, they are persistent, and they don't give up. They don't quit. They will send you flying underwater. And just generally, they're little jerks. Just like Bullfangos are on land. Okay, affinity oil is out. So let's get it back. I almost got hit there. Thankfully, I didn't. Another thing Royal Ludroth was really good at showing off in Try was the stamina system, which was new in that game. It's one of the monsters with a really obvious tell for when it's getting tired, is its main deflates. So that's another system that Royal Ludroth did a really good job of just introducing players to. Honestly, I think Royal Ludroth is one of the best early game monsters they've made, just in terms of what it does to show things to players. And I think it is a much better teacher than Kutku was. Again, because of the number of things it shows and the fact that it doesn't move just like everything else you're fighting in its tier. I feel like it's a really good monster, because the fact that it doesn't move like other things in its tier means that you actually have to pay more attention to what it's doing, whereas Kutku moves an awful lot like Gypsaros. So, like, yeah, Royal Ludroth, it's a great teacher monster. I really like it. Even though aesthetically it's not my favorite monster. I do like monitor lizards, they're cool. Though the yellow sponge is kind of silly. Also, I do not at all care for purple Ludroth, because I just get poisoned way too easily against it, and the fact that it can do noxious poison is nasty. At least in G rank, it can do noxious poison. Oh yeah, Royal Ludroth is a good monster. Introduces you to a lot of things, doesn't move like other monsters in its tier, so you actually have to pay more attention to it. In my opinion, looks way better than Kutku. It's a good monster. And we were going to fail that ride whether I kept stabbing there or not. Okay, we may have missed with more than half of that, but we got some hits. I'm going to count that as a win. Another thing Ludroth has over Kutku, it's a water monster, which there are precious few of, whereas Kutku is just yet another fire monster. There's way too many fire monsters, and like no water monsters. Ice monsters are also pretty few and far between, but ice didn't even exist as an element in Monster Hunter 1, so there's at least a reason for that. What water monsters did Monster Hunter 1 have? Plesioth, duh. And I guess Cephadrome. Okay, we need to re-up the oil. Royal Ludroth also has the interesting distinction of, in my opinion, being easier to fight in the water than outside it. But honestly, that was kind of needed so that it could help get players acclimated to underwater combat. Because underwater combat is definitely not the same as land combat. It feels really similar to me, just with camera differences controlling how you actually move. Like, the camera becomes free instead of having specific ticks for up and down that it moves between. Like, it can actually free scroll like this. And basically just move camera, and then that's how your character moves. It moves relative to the camera rather than anything else, because they had to add that third dimension. And other than that, underwater combat felt really similar to me relative to land combat. Of course, I used hammers and switch axes, so admittedly those two weapons do just fine in underwater combat. Apparently some don't do as well. But in order to get people used to fighting underwater, which is different than fighting on land, they needed something that could be fought both ways, I guess, and that would be not too difficult underwater. And I guess their idea was, if we make it easier underwater than on land, then maybe the difference will be made up by the process of acclimating to underwater combat. And honestly, I feel like they did a good job. Royal Ludroth is just a really good monster. And hey, we hit with most of those. And unfortunately, since this is Hyper Royal Ludroth, we don't get to see it bathe in the waterfall here to restore the water in its mane. But that's the thing that happens. Unlike a lot of monsters who go to eat when they're tired, Royal Ludroth takes a bath. Replenishes the water it's lost. Which is just another neat thing about Royal Ludroth. Like, there's a lot of things it does differently than other monsters. And I always appreciate that. And it's got a lot of moves that no other Leviathan uses, which is cool. Like, even though it's the first Leviathan people encounter, it's got unique moves. Whereas until Kutku got the Conchu bowling, basically all of its moves were moves that were also had by other bird wyverns. Yeah, it's a pretty decent looking monster. The sponge texture is kind of low res, but then we get to the face. Those scales look pretty nice. And then, like, the body and the tail, that looks pretty okay. Yeah. And heck, we can even look at the little muscling inside the tail. Yeah, like, that belly looks pretty darn nice. The belly and the face look really good on this monster in this game. Though the teeth could use something to help separate them out so that they don't just look like fangs and then kind of serrated plates behind them. Something to make it look like there's actually multiple teeth in there would probably be good. Yeah. I hope that if you didn't already appreciate Royal Ludroth, that this episode helped you come to appreciate it more. And wow, that was a big one. Because it's honestly a monster that deserves a lot more love than it gets. I feel like it did Kutku's job, but better. So, yeah, take that, pink bird. Anyway, that's it for this episode. Join us next time when we play with Agnactor. See you then, friends.